Today's film is definitely the R-rated family values film that you've been waiting for. Howdy. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week, I plan to bring you in-depth insights into the creative process of storytelling. And folks, I am quite proud to have as our guest today, writer, director, and star James Morosini to talk about his latest film, I Love My Dad. And yes, this is an R-rated movie that has family values because this is a father that will do anything for his son and truly cares about him, even though he regrets being quite flaky. And, there's just great casting and great performances in this film, and it's very funny. And James was quite forthcoming about his creative process and what it took to write, direct, and star in this film. So I know you'll dig this episode. I would, of course, like to thank today's sponsor, Screencraft. And it's kind of wild because the script for today's podcast of I Love My Dad happened to be the 2020 Screencraft comedy competition winner. That's right. As James was getting his script out into the world, he managed to win the Screencraft comedy script competition, which was just one of the many awards that this film would wind up winning, including the Grand Jury Prize and Audience Awards at the 2022 South by Southwest Film Festival. It just goes to show that Screencraft has everything for your writing journey, from the craft of writing to the business of Hollywood, including video lectures with your favorite writers like Tony Gilroy and J.J. Abrams, to hands-on career consulting with the writer development team. Screencraft also has some of the best genre screenwriting competitions, including judges that include Oscar-winning screenwriters and top literary representatives. Hundreds of past Screencraft winners and finalists started their career and have been staffed at shows on Netflix, Amazon, Apple TV, the CW, ABC, Paramount Plus, and they have also sold scripts and been hired to write films for Universal, Netflix, Lionsgate, Blumhouse, and Hulu, just to name a few. As for today's guest, James Morosini, after winning the 2020 Screencraft comedy competition with his script for I Love My Dad, he went through the Screencraft program and was able to meet with Netflix, Joint Effort, and executives at the production companies for Seth Rogen and Taika Waititi. So there really is something for everyone over at Screencraft. So I hope you'll head on over to screencraft.org and check them out today. And speaking of things to dig, Backstory Magazine turns 10. That's right. We survived a decade and we couldn't have done it without your help. And the other good news is that we just released a new issue. Yes, issue 47, our summer issue, is live, and there is so much great stuff in it. I hope you check out the table contents to see it all, but we have Emmy Awards contenders ranging from Stranger Things, Better Call Saul, Station 11, Barry, Hacks, and What We Do in the Shadows, to summer movies, to new scripts for you to read, to an interview with director John Carpenter on the 40th anniversary of The Thing. Man, there are so many great things in this issue, and I hope you check it out. If you have never read us before, you can, of course, test drive us over at backstory.net and read the free issue, or you could use the iPad app Backstory, where you could read the free issue there as well. And if you like what you see, and I hope you do, you could consider becoming a subscriber. And to sweeten the deal, I want to give you discount coupon code SAVE5. That will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. The code will work at backstory.net, and you enter it there in your checkout cart, but it'll give you access to both backstory.net and the iPad app as well. So, it's 2 for 1. You get access to both easily. But look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and iTunes and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube channel, which is all these Zoomcasts go of these interviews. So you could see us do the interviews. You don't have to just hear us, but it would really mean a lot to me to have you subscribe to my passion project. So thanks for considering. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right into our interview with writer, director, and star James Morosini about his latest film, I Love My Dad. Okay, so James, it's good to see you, man. How's it going?
I'm good, man. It's good to see you as well.
Well, so we're going to start in the non-spoiler section as we always do. And, I want to give people a baseline on you. So tell us, from whence dost thou hail, and what did you study in school? Did you study acting, I'm guessing, because that seems to be your early path, or were you also studying writing and filmmaking?
Yeah, I grew up in Boston. I grew up making a lot of shorts and dumb videos with my friends. And then I went to USC for theater and film.
Cool.
was doing a lot of plays and stuff, but I was also making shorts and studying screenwriting. And I've kind of always approached it from all of the different angles. I formally studied acting, but was kind of making things as I went along.
That's fantastic. That was actually the exact route that I chose. Because when I went to USC, I did theater and film as well, getting into the theater school first, coming as a kid from Kansas. And at the time I was there, the theater department and the film department were not as aligned as they should have been. And I tried to do my best to use theater department actors in my shorts rather than just the kids in my film school class. What was the alignment like when you were there?
I had a pretty similar experience.
Really?
They were they were kind of siloed. I think they've done a better job as of late.
Stupid.
I know it was kind of silly. But I was going to audition for all the student films, and I did 100 or so while I was there.
Wow.
And it's funny when you're doing student film after student film, you're often getting more practice directing and being on set than people even making them are. But, I did a ton of plays while I was there. And so I started to, I feel like my filmmaking kind of combines all of those realms of experience.
That's fantastic. And of course, being an actor on a student film means you're observing everything, so that by the time you're making your own student films, you've seen some of the classic mistakes. Yeah. You know what to do. What were some of the early things you gleaned on your path of like realizing that you could be a writer as well?
The first writing I ever did was I'm in New York right now. And some of the first writing I ever did was with this theater company called Labyrinth. And they had these great theater professionals come and kind of do workshops, one of whom was Stephen Adley Gurgis, who's a playwright that I love and was a fan of prior to his doing the workshop. And he would really encourage people to pull as much as they could from their own lives and then adjust certain details to make them more entertaining, but to kind of combine so that you're really writing from the heart. So when I was like 18 or 19, I was writing these plays that were hyper personal. And I kind of continued to do that through these screenwriting classes at USC. It was a way for me to like process stuff from my past or to explore interactions that I felt like I wanted to share with other people because I thought they were weird or funny.
We'll talk obviously in the spoiler section a little more about this, but there's sometimes a danger because if you write something too personal that only means something to you, it doesn't translate. But at the same time, without writing something personal, it doesn't make it unique, right? It doesn't stand out, and you're just trying to imitate other structures, other storylines, other characters. What kind of middle ground did you find on the concept of writing something personal, but at the same time still keeping it entertaining and working as a film for people that don't even know you?
I don't think my early films worked really at all. And the things that I wrote early on, I don't know if they necessarily worked at all, but I think I had to, some of the first features I wrote that I didn't make were so autobiographical that they weren't necessarily entertaining, and they were also messy because real life usually involves a lot more people or random arbitrary details that don't necessarily add to the experience of watching the film. What I was doing then was I was just taking, a situation from my past or a certain perspective, and then I was just trying to like exaggerate it as much as I could and explore all of the different things in it. Or sometimes I would add a very heightened element to like a story that I knew really well from my own life. Like I would add something supernatural, or I would add something kind of cataclysmic, but it would start out with really just something as true to life as I could. And then I would pepper in this kind of heightened circumstance that would give it more flavor than something just.
So a bit of mixing and matching. That totally makes sense. I know breaking in, you had written and directed some shorts. You then debuted in the 2013 film, The Hands You Shake. And on TV, you were on Sex Sent Me to the ER, the Game Over episode, in fact, which I'm sure was probably an absolute blast to do. But also more recently, American Horror Story and The Sex Lives of College Girls. So you've had like your gamut of TV, but I want to focus on your first feature, your feature writing directing debut, 2018's Three Something.
You don't want to talk about Sex Sent Me to the ER.
Well, actually, okay, tell me about that episode. Tell me the most surreal moment of that episode.
When you're first starting out as an actor, you're just like, how do I get any job? I think I found that online somewhere. And yeah, I mean, it was, it was horrible.
And you're using your own personal story of how sex sent you to the ER, as you were talking about, using your own personal tales.
Yeah, it was really pulling from more deep inside of me.
Yes.
My shame.
Was it a silly episode? What was the thing that sent you to the ER?
Oh God. I mean,
in the game over episode.
It's really, it's pretty stupid, man. I mean, I think my character was having like a lot of sex with all these older women, and then
it happens.
Yeah. And then ends up getting some sort of, he gets an STD. And so then he passes it to like all these older women, and then they all like confront him at the hospital together. Yeah. It was like one of the most uncomfortable.
That sounds like a terrifying Twilight Zone episode.
Yeah, no, I hope that I hope to never be on that show again.
That's a crazy concept. Well, so all right, tell us about Three Something. Give people the pitch that aren't familiar with it, but I suggest that folks go see it, and it is available to rent or to see. I'm pretty sure for free online. I want to say a place like Tubi has it with ads, or Vudu with ads. So, but you could easily find Three Something online. Give us the pitch and tell us about that experience of making your first feature.
So Three Something is about threesome that goes wrong.
Right.
That's essentially the movie encapsulated in very short. But it's about two hypersensitive guys, and it's about how guys are really terrible at navigating intimacy and often use things to figure out ways to get closer with one another because we're often so bad at it. I watched a lot of like Duplass brothers movies and Swanberg movies, and I was I'd made a ton of shorts by that point, and I had made a web series of 10 episodes, and I was eager to make a feature, but I really had no idea how to go about doing that. I didn't know what I didn't know, and the prospect of making a feature just seemed intimidating, and like I would have no idea how to even take the first step. And so I actually ran into Joe Swanberg at the Oaks Gourmet in Franklin Village. And I asked him, hey, how do I make my first movie? And he's like, just don't make any excuses. Start making one tomorrow. It doesn't matter if it's bad, just finish it and just start telling the story chronologically.
And for people that don't know Joe Swanberg's work, that's what he did when he was breaking in. You know, it was by any means necessary, whatever equipment he had, just get it done. And
he made I think when he was 31, he made something like 11 features.
He has a huge library. I mean, he's had a great output. But I mean, that's great advice. And I've always seen Three Something as kind of like a zany or Y Tu Mama Tambien, right? In a way, because there's echoes of that in there. But it was something that definitely resonated with people, and it put you on the map because it was funny enough and had enough of a heart and enough of an edge as an independent film that you sold it. And, you had buyers, and that's what distributors want when they fund other filmmakers, or producers, at least. They want to be able to sell their damn film. Tell us, what was it like getting your first film sold? Do you remember any surreal moments in the room of these weird negotiations? And you don't have to name anyone by name or a company by name, but also if there was somebody that wanted to do something that you flat out rejected, as part of that process as absurd or stupid, let us know too.
My intent with that movie was that I was going to finish it by any means necessary. And I really just wanted the experience of making a feature from start to finish, all the way through marketing and distribution. I just wanted that experience so that I knew how to navigate, and so that I could learn the things I didn't know. So I edited that movie. My friend Sam and I produced it together. We were very hands-on. It was a very small crew. But when we finished it, my friend and I went to Sundance, and we didn't have a movie there. We were just kind of bopping around to parties and sharing the link with a bunch of folks. And I met a guy who we went down the rabbit hole talking about Vipassana meditation. We had both done like a 10-day retreat. And then it turned out that he worked for a distributor. So I sent him the movie, and they dug it. And then they made an offer. And our goal with that first film was really to just get it seen as widely as possible. And we were able to accomplish that through that deal. Around the same time, there were other people that, we had some weird offers as well. There was someone that offered to buy the movie for a significant amount of money to remake it, to basically take the movie off the shelves and then to use the structure and script and concept and to just go reshoot it for more money and more recognizable actors and whatnot. And it was enough money, and we were broke enough where we were really seriously considering it. And then we ultimately decided not to do that.
And so what was your budget and schedule in making it?
Yeah, I mean, we made that movie for pretty much no money. It was the kind of filmmaking where we were reaching out to random rich people for money. And in terms of schedule, it was whenever any of us were available, which at that point in our lives was pretty much all the time. So we were just like, we would get up and we would just, we had an outline. Some scenes were scripted, some weren't, and we would just shoot it chronologically. And then anytime any of us had a whim to go in a different direction, we would just explore that other direction, because it was pretty contained and there were only a few actors. So we were really able to be nimble in terms of just exploration, which was...
How many shooting days do you think you had?
I think we probably had 17 or 18 total.
Okay. And what'd you shoot it on?
We shot it on a Red Dragon.
Okay.
It was a nice camera, and the DP, I think his work actually looks great in it.
What's kind of wild about that one also is that you edited it.
Yeah.
So what'd you cut it on?
I cut it on Premiere Pro.
Okay.
And, I had edited all of my work up until that point. So I continued to do that through 3-something. And then I would basically make a cut of the movie. We would screen it for friends, get their feedback, and then go shoot more and incorporate feedback that resonated with us. So it was this kind of weirdly iterative process in terms of making that first film.
So you were workshopping it with a script that wasn't completed, that was more of like a treatment outline, essentially?
Essentially, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we didn't even have anything written down. We literally carried around like a big white poster board with note cards on it, like in the back seat of my car, that we would then like bring on the set. It was extremely experimental, but I think it kind of injected this like liveliness to a lot of the scenes, because we were kind of figuring it out as we went. And so we as the actors didn't necessarily know where it would go all the time.
Right. But that's a dangerous way to go. And your film obviously ended up good. And there's a lot of people that do that do not have good results. Would you ever do that again? What was your lesson from shooting like that? I mean, it's well known in comedy that, and we'll talk about this later, because I'm sure you did some of this on your film, that often you'll have a script, and then once you hit the scene, you'll do alternatives, and allow for improv. And that's a very common way to go that leads to other things and leads to rewrites during, regular or independent feature shoots. But walking in without a script is definitely a bold move. So would you do it again? And what was your biggest lesson there?
I wouldn't do it again. I made another movie after 3-something that I made similarly in that way. And but it was more ambitious and involved more people, and the storyline was more complicated. And, we ended up spending a ton of time on something that just wasn't good enough for us to release it. And that was really, I think, where I learned the most in terms of committing to really learning how to write a proper feature. And that's when I think I went down the rabbit hole of, okay, it's important that the movie as a whole is resonant, and that the individual scenes, I mean, 3-something has a lot of really fun and funny individual scenes, but it's looser. And I think if you want to really resonate with an audience, you have to be working with the end in mind, and have a deeper understanding of what story you're trying to tell and how each individual piece fits into it. So I wouldn't do it again. I think it's a great way for people to make their first films, and I would encourage others to do that if they're having a hard time getting anything made. But I wouldn't do it again myself, especially with if you had an actual budget on it. I just think it's probably too risky.
What was the name of the film that you didn't release?
Oh gosh, that movie was called More, and it had a really interesting concept. And
what was it?
It was about this guy who wants to make a band and come up with a completely new sound. So he brings a bunch of people out to Big Bear, and then he's like trying to come up with a new sound with these people, and then he like goes crazy. And our what we were trying to do is we were basically, our goal was to figure out the movie as we made it, and then to echo things in the story that were happening to us as we were trying to make the movie, so that it had this kind of weird meta flair to it throughout.
Okay.
But it ultimately just, it was kind of all over the place, and there were way more people involved in this one than there were in Three Something. So it was hard for us to get everyone on the same page, and Three Something worked because it was really three hyper committed actors, really, right, that were like, we're down to spend as much time as we need on this thing. Whereas this other movie, it was more so people like, yeah, this sounds fun, we'll come out for a little bit, but then when we'd need them for other scenes we'd come up with, maybe they weren't available, and it ended up just being kind of and then we'd have to navigate around them in the story, and we were just, it became this kind of big confusing mess.
I mean, sometimes you need an experience like that to inform your work. People talk about this a lot in screenwriting on the page, needing to be able to fail, having the freedom to fail. And nobody wants a situation like what you just described with Moore, but it can be rewarding if you take the lessons learned seriously on your next project. That's the only way forward.
I think if you're not failing, then you're really not learning. You're not risking enough.
Yeah.
And you're not growing and developing new skills. I mean, I don't know. My mentality has always been like, I want my ambition creatively to exceed my grasp with the skills and abilities that I have now.
And that's a good way to think of it. Well, going away from failure right into success, we're going to talk about today's movie, I Love My Dad. It's in theaters, and people will also be able to get it on demand as well. I think a good place to start is really where the concept hits you. We're in the non-spoiler section, so you could tell us things that we know from the trailer. The setup's pretty easy, but it's, speaking of success, it won the Screencraft Comedy Grand Prize in 2020, and recently at South by Southwest, now in 2022, where it debuted, it won the Narrative Feature Grand Jury Prize, and it won the Audience Award. So, I mean, a resounding success for that, and congrats on that. Tell us where the concept stemmed from.
So the concept came from something that happened to me a long time ago. My dad and I got into a big fight. I decided it'd be better if he wasn't in my life. I think I was around 19 or 20 at the time. So I blocked him on social media. I just cut him out entirely. He was really worried about me at the time. I was going through a dark moment, but I refused to talk with him about any of it. And I got home one day, and this really pretty girl had sent me a friend request online, and she was beautiful and had all these amazing pictures, and we had all the same interests. And I was really thrilled. And then it turned out to be my dad, pretending to be this other person to make sure that I was okay.
How long did it take for you to figure that out?
Longer than I wish it had. I'll say that. So,
because the trailer gives, based on a true story, and the movie says inspired by true events as well, so we know that there's a sense that happened. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's funny. When I found out that it was my dad, I remember the feeling, and I felt angry and betrayed and kind of humiliated, but there was a weird part of me that was also kind of laughing at it. It, like, almost from outside of myself. A part of me, I've always loved comedy, and I've always been a fan of storytelling. And there was a part of me that was like, this is almost amazing, that this is hilarious. And then I forgot about it for a long time, and really didn't think about it again for almost a decade.
I think what works so well about it is part of it's endearing, because this isn't like, a psychological thriller or something. The dad character here is legitimately concerned about his son, feels terrible that he has been shut out, and knows that there's definite reasons for it that are his own fault, but he wants a connection. I'm just curious. I mean, I'm sure you would have the answer, or I hope you do. Why did your dad pick a girl avatar? Why not just make it some random, like, hipster filmmaker type that is a, film enthusiast, and then he could have a normal conversation that would never get away from, the way that things go in both, I'm guessing, real life and the movie as well?
I think it was a pretty half-baked idea. I think his intent was that he was going to friend me, and then I was going to accept, and then I was just going to forget that I accepted the friend request.
Right. He would like lurk on your account.
Yeah, exactly. Just to like check in and make sure I was doing okay. So his thinking, I think, it wasn't a well thought out plan at all. But the thing that I think endeared me to the story was what you were just talking about, which is somebody doing the wrong thing for the right reasons.
Yeah.
I'm just fascinated by that. And I love the question of, would you catfish your child to save their life? Like, would you do the wrong thing to save someone's life that you love? Because I don't know. I mean, if I had a son to save their life, yeah, I'd catfish, sure. I mean, but then what would happen if I loved just really unpacking that idea and exploring it, and also the idea of like, can I get an audience on board with catfishing somebody? Because we're usually experiencing it from the other side of things, somebody who's been catfished or is being catfished.
Right.
But I like stories that are exploring kind of somebody doing something wrong, but then really building the argument for why they think that's the right thing to do.
Patton Oswalt as Chuck, the dad, is a perfect, way in for the audience, because everybody likes Patton Oswalt. So, we're gonna go with him and see what kind of trouble he's gonna get everybody into. So it works, and it leads to a great trailer. It's an easy to describe concept, which certainly works well. Tell us about the development process. Like, once you realized it could be a movie, how long did it take you to start batting it around?
So I remember the moment that I got excited by the concept, and it was immediately followed by this wave of disappointment where I was like, I can't have an audience look at people texting for 2 hours.
Right.
That's not going to work. I can't just be showing these messages being exchanged. And then I kind of stumbled upon this idea where I was like, oh, what does it feel like when you're messaging with someone? And it feels like they're right there with you. So what if they actually are? What if every time somebody's messaging someone else, they're physically materialized, so that it's cinematic? And then we can also sometimes forget that this girl that my character is talking to is actually the dad, and it adds this great dramatic irony to the whole thing.
I was going to ask about that. Were you ever going to have Becca lip sync? Becca's the girl. Were you ever going to have her lip sync with Patton Oswalt's voice playing underneath? I think it maybe happens once or twice in the movie briefly, but it could have been a whole move.
Yeah, I really wanted to experience catfishing someone in the movie, and then also the experience of being catfished. And I kind of wanted to play back and forth between those two perspectives. And so my feeling was that if his voice was coming out of her mouth, it would be hard for us to forget that was the dad, and it would be hard for us to get invested in their love story.
Absolutely.
So that kind of creative tree branch was cut off early on.
I think it's interesting though, because like you really succeeded on a high level, because you get that experience for the character of being catfished, because they have this really nice, flirtatious, talkative relationship where they're able to talk about deep things. And so it really works, to the point that when the audience finally in real life late in the film meets Becca, I don't think that's a huge spoiler. It's pretty obvious it's going to go that way. We feel like we have a sense of who she is, but it's very clear very fast that, she has no idea what's going on, of course, because how could she? And it also gets that experience of catfishing brought forward again. Just for describing it on the page, did you end up using like the dual dialogue thing so that you could have two people on the page at once talking to each other? Or was it really just a character back and forth the way that we regularly read it?
It was just a character back and forth. And then when we see the actual Becca in real life, I would just call her the real Becca.
Got it.
As a way of differentiating. In terms of the development process of the story, it started with where could this go? What are interesting dynamics that I can explore? And scene ideas and like just funny things that could happen started pouring out of me. And then it was also cataloging kind of anecdotally anything from my own life that I wanted to integrate throughout the film. Something that appealed to me about telling the story was that I was having the opportunity to really explore my own relationship with my actual dad and ask myself difficult questions about that. And really, I don't know, I was like almost making the movie for that relationship in a way. And so I wanted it to have, I wanted that was a big part of it for me.
What year was it when you started thinking about it in filmic terms?
I think it was like 3 years ago. It was pretty recent.
Okay. When you started to think about it in filmic terms, I'm curious, like, just for your creative writing habits here, how long did you give yourself for an outline, if you outlined?
Did I outline? I don't think I gave myself any amount of time. It was a pretty disorganized workflow.
Interesting. Tell us about it. Because I would think after more, again, with kind of your improv structure, that you might have had more of an earlier design document. So you had no early design document? You just started writing?
I had like certain beats that I wanted to hit.
Okay.
And then I kind of used that first draft as kind of an outline, but I have a tendency to overthink and get kind of paralyzed by perfectionism. So what I'll often do in my first drafts is I'll make them as messy as I possibly can. And just, I'm talking to myself in the action and I'm being absurd and doing things that are way over the top on the page just to keep myself entertained.
Like what would be way over the top?
I'm like making excessively long jokes to the reader. And like,
Got it.
I'm trying to get out of thinking about how to do it in the right way. I'm trying to just be like, I'm just trying to be as free as I possibly can.
Most people call it a vomit draft for the first pass, just get it all out. Don't self-edit. So it sounds like that's what you were doing.
Yeah. But if you read the first draft of my movies, you'd be like, this guy has something wrong with him.
How long was it? Was it overly long?
It was, I think it was like 130 pages or something.
Okay. That's totally normal.
There were a few other ideas that I'd had a long time ago that kind of converged into it. And then it was a similar process to Three Something in that it was iterative, where I'd have a reading of it and then I'd get more perspective around it. And then I'd
with
go
actors,
with actors or
okay,
friends or other writers. And then I would often start back at page one. And through that process, that's when I started really outlining it in a detailed way. And then it was just a matter of like finding the heart of the story. Like, what is the motor of it? Which is Chuck wants to make sure his son is okay and is not going to harm himself. And to make sure that goal was present all the way through. And then, with that motor, then it was just a matter of integrating a lot of my own personal stuff into it. Just so, I don't know, some of it I was making for an audience, and then some of it I was truly making for myself and for my dad.
Well, so clearly something this personal, you knew that you were going to play Franklin, the lead, the kid. And
not necessarily.
Oh, really? Okay. Because I was going to ask, like, was there ever a chance that you were not going to act in it because it complicates it for you as a director?
Yeah. I had people tell me early on when I was trying to put it together that nobody was going to let me direct and star in it, that I had to choose one or the other.
But you did direct and you acted in Three Something.
I think that people thought no one's going to give you millions of dollars to do this.
It. Yeah.
And I took that advice to heart and I was like, okay, maybe you're right. And so I went about casting Patton as Chuck. I built the cast around him. And then I was actively looking for someone else to play Franklin. And I met a lot of great actors. And I couldn't find anyone that was really going to make sense for it. And then I ultimately, I was like, and then someone else was like, dude, just, what are you doing? Just play it. You should play it. That was bad advice. Just do it. And so then I wanted to make sure it worked. So he and I went over to his house and I wanted to, I shot an entire scene on my iPhone, and just so I could see if it worked visually. And I really liked the way it played. And I was about to share that with my investor and my producing partners. And they were like, we were confused why you didn't do this from the beginning. Like, yeah, that makes it way easier. You should just play Franklin.
Yeah.
I didn't even end up showing that to anybody.
Interesting. And so did you write it knowing that you wanted Patton to be Chuck? He
was definitely somebody whose voice I had in my head as I was writing it, but I wasn't certain that I was going to even be able to get an actor of that caliber on board.
Right.
I mean, there was a version of the movie that I was prepared to make where I cast my actual dad as Chuck.
Really?
And my actual mom as my mom in the movie.
Wow.
I was going to make that movie for, I was going to put together like $100,000 or something.
Yeah, that'd be like a Joe Swanberg movie. That's.
Yeah, I was ready.
Did you ever tell them that? Did they ever agree to even doing that?
No, I think they would have though.
Okay.
I made a short film with my actual dad at one point.
Okay.
And he has a very thick accent. He's from Argentina.
Got it.
He's pretty funny and weird. And it was one of my favorite shorts that I ever made. And so I figured it could make sense. And then I ultimately decided that my mental health was more, and that I would have just gone crazy if I was. That would have been a lot. Parents in this heightened situation, it probably would have fallen apart. But I was ready to do it. I thought the spectacle of it could have been really exciting.
Would have made a great documentary, though.
Yeah, right.
How everything went to hell on that set. What was the short that your dad was in? Which of your shorts? It
was called Shampoo.
Okay.
And it's basically, my dad runs every day for 5 miles a day. And it's about him visiting me in Los Angeles, and we're going to go to lunch, and he's like dripping in sweat, and he asks to use my shower.
That's funny.
And I refuse to let him use my shower. And then he forcibly makes his way into my shower and takes a shower. And it's like, I don't know. It's kind of an exploration of like adulthood and someone feeling like they still kind of own their kid, and then the child feeling like they're brought back to their own childhood. And it was a fun little short.
That sounds funny. When you sit down to write, how many hours a day do you write, or do you give yourself a page count to hit?
I mean, right now I'm struggling to put time together where I'm really disciplined and focused on writing. But when I'm in practice, I would say I try to do 2 to 3 hours a day. And if I'm really not feeling it, I'll just try to get something, I'll set a timer for 10 minutes. If I'm really not feeling it, I know that this is my livelihood at this point in my life. And so I need to do it whether I feel like it or not. And often through the process of doing it is how I'll feel like doing it. But the feeling like doing it isn't necessarily present before I start.
I could see that. Like, so it's almost like you're having an anticipation issue, and writer's block is setting in before you've even sat in the chair.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, it definitely helps me to know what I'm asking of myself. So it's useful before I start anything. I'll usually like outline the process for myself, and then I'll try to stick to that as diligently as I can. And I'll try to give myself permission to again, like be at 75% all the way through and not be doing necessarily my best work every day. And I think that permission often allows me to remain productive as opposed to be trapped with this feeling of inadequacy that's very paralyzing.
Especially in early drafts, the concept of progress versus perfection is something that everybody has to battle. Well, so you didn't have an exact page count that you were going for each day. You didn't have an exact hour time limit. How long did it take you to get your first draft of your script?
On I Love My Dad, I think it happened pretty quickly. I think I was probably done in like a month or something. And
wow. Okay. That's great.
Yeah. And then it was many, many, many drafts over the next year or so, and different kind of variations of the story during that time. And it would often, when I finish a draft and I feel like, oh, this is good to send out, and then there will be new ideas that maybe come at me from others or just within myself, I often have this feeling of like, oh man, but I don't want to go back and do it. And that's going to take so much work. But usually when I crack it back open and am willing to explode the whole thing, only the best pieces will kind of find their way back and accrete around the central core of the story. And so I'm continually encouraging myself to just be willing to throw everything out throughout the process.
Well, I mean, we covered it almost with writer's block, but do you get it? Like, it sounds like really just getting started, which, by the way, plenty of writers have the exact same issue. And then once they're in the chair for a while, they're better. But that first sitting down, looking at the blank page is, causes avoidance issues. There's no other way to say it in some writers.
For me, writer's block is just, it's the experience of asking yourself to do something ambiguous. where you're like, okay, it's time to write today. And you're like, you're kind of like, I don't know what that is. Like, what do you mean I'm going to write today? Like, especially when you're rewriting and it's not just about making forward motion in terms of number of pages, but when you're at the point of figuring out your story, sometimes it's unclear exactly what it means to sit down and write. And that's, I think, when it gets scary. And I think writer's block it's just fear of like, I don't want to feel stupid and be in a place of unknown. And so the way that I try to battle it is by being really kind of using a different part of my brain and being like, okay, what am I asking myself to do today? And then trying to just concretize those things so that I have like a specific action plan that I can be creative within.
Well, so it took a year to get basically multiple drafts done. And I'm guessing at some time toward the end of that year, you got it to Patton Oswalt.
I want to say one more thing about writer's block.
Tell me, please.
So I think like writing, you kind of have to be a little kid when you're writing something. Like you have to be willing to be playful and weird as you were when you were a little kid. And when you were a little kid, the only time you could really play was when you felt safe and there was like almost parental boundaries of some sort. Like you're at a play date or you're here in a park. But if you're like somewhere where you're scared, you're not going to be playful. And I think the same is true as an adult. You have to kind of create that little playground for yourself in terms of like actionables. So that's the only, I, for some reason, felt like I had to get that out of my system.
I think it's completely legit. I mean, obviously you're going to feel better when you're in a mellow atmosphere and more importantly, a mellow mindset as a writer. And that's why people say, like, no matter what genre you're writing, sometimes people say, don't write to the budget. Like, just do the little kid version. Do the movie that you want to see is always going to be the best advice for a writer. Because if you want to see it and you trust your own instincts and you trust, your taste, you're going to try and make a cool movie that only you could envision. But if you're trying to conform to either budget, schedule, or other things, which you will have to later, of course, those are realities. That's not the greatest starting point. That's a good ending point when you've started in a better creative place. That totally makes sense. Well, so you get it done. You go through multiple drafts. You've got notes from your friends. I'm guessing won Screencraft and then started taking it out to actors. Is that what went down?
Yeah, I think I hit a point in the process where I was like, I don't necessarily know how to move this ball down the field any further. And so I was really willing to do anything it took. And so any possible path that was available to me, I was just going down multiple paths at once. I was reaching out to every rich person that I knew, family members, friends. I was asking a billion questions of people that had made films before. How do I do this part of the process? And then I was also just submitting it to screenwriting competitions because I thought that if it won or did well, I could leverage that for attracting interest. And that's what happened. It won the Screencraft. And then Patton's manager asked me if I thought that Patton would be good for it. And Patton had been top of my list for a long time. So
Patton's manager basically saw it win Screencraft.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
He was a friend of mine, and he was like, "Dude, congratulations! Do you think this could be right for Patton?" I was
That's
like,
awesome,
dude. He's been on, yeah. So
I mean, it's funny because you said a second ago, like you took it as far as you could go, and that's a thing that happens to a lot of writers, in which there is nothing in life that tells you when you're done writing. And most writers would love to continue writing. And of course, once you get actors involved and producers and you have the realities of the film, there's little rewrites that need to be done all along the way. Do you remember anything about realizing that you've taken it as far as you could go, that you were actually done when you started, going out to the contests? Was there a problem you were trying to solve on the page that you realized, okay, you know what? This thing's done, until like now it's time to find somebody that wants to fund it. And if they have something interesting to say, I'll change it. Otherwise, I'm ready to make this.
I think I hit a point of just sheer exhaustion around it where I was like, this is not getting, I started working on it and it wouldn't get better. It would get worse in some ways, or like it would start to feel like it'd just been in the oven for too long. And I was just confident enough with the material and felt like, yeah, there might be parts that could use work, but it's good enough where I'm ready to move on to the next stage. And, I continued writing some of it through production.
Look, it's interesting that you had this going. It's at a much bigger budget. Are you able to say the budget and schedule?
No, not really. But
are you able to say the schedule?
Yeah, we had about like 5 weeks, I'd say.
Okay, 5 weeks. So, you as an actor, especially knowing that you're going to direct it, did you have a formal rehearsal period? Because it's something that indies, it's hard to get, but especially when you're directing and you don't have as much time on a set, you want people to know as much as they can so you could discover a little.
So because I was one of the leads of the film, I was able to rehearse with myself and my acting coach, this guy, Doug Tompos. He and I rehearsed extensively ahead of time.
Okay.
I wanted to understand what I needed from my own performance so that I could trust that was there. And then I just had to figure out how everything else came together. And then we spent about a week in Syracuse rehearsing with the actors. Patton and I had been talking on Zooms a lot and meeting up and talking through the story a bunch. But then that week of rehearsals, we really got into the nitty gritty of doing scene work and sometimes improvising to just deepen what was already on the page.
That's interesting to use your acting coach. I mean, that sounds like actually a really smart idea. And I don't hear a lot of people that star in their own stuff always talk about that. It gives you a different director's perspective about your performance that you might not be able to look at with your own critical eye, because you need like a third party's critical eye. Not everyone does, but clearly I think it was smart that you did. What were some of the interesting things that Doug was able to show you that you weren't seeing about yourself in your own performances?
So when you're the writer and then you're also acting in it, you can sometimes kind of like not take the story as seriously as the story is asking to be taken, and you're asking others to take it because you're like, yeah, I wrote it, I understand it, I don't actually need to experientially dive into this story. I get it. I'm the one that came up with it. But then when you bring somebody else on and you're hearing them talk story with you in the same way they would another writer's work, it kind of hits you just in a different way. And when you're writing and directing, you're thinking about the whole story. You're thinking about it oftentimes not from one person's point of view. You're thinking about it very omnisciently. But then when you're acting, you really have to be just looking at the story through one point of view and be innocent to the way the story develops. You have to really be living in kind of the question of the story. And that's what Doug was able to help me kind of access through the process of working very close together. And throughout production, I would sometimes have conversations with him on weekends, and just to make sure that my heart was really invested in the story from the perspective of Franklin and not just directorially.
That's a good way to look at it, is having that kind of outsider's view in, that you can't see the forest for the trees if you're too deep in. Did Doug stay on through the shoot as well?
Yeah. So he was in Los Angeles. We shot in New York. So we were like working over Zoom and stuff, but
got it.
Acting requires tremendous vulnerability. And I think sometimes when you're writing and directing, you feel pressure to have a lot of knowns of like, I know how this works. I know what emotion this character needs to be experiencing here. And that's really antithetical to what you need to be doing as an actor, which is like giving yourself permission to have whatever experience, and building the world more imaginatively. And so I found a great deal of resistance early on in preparing for the role, where I was like, I don't want to feel all this stuff. I was like, oh wow, there's this whole other work I have to do here that I wasn't anticipating.
Absolutely. Well, obviously pre-production is important. How long did you have for pre-production?
We had about a
5-week shoot.
Month and a half.
Okay. That's pretty good. You basically had the same amount of time as your shoot.
Yeah, I flew out to Syracuse about a month before we started principal photography.
Okay. And you were shooting in, was it spring of 21?
We shot last year. We started shooting in May.
In May. Okay. So it was an interesting time. And we'll talk about this a little more later too, but people were just getting vaccinated, and you're making a film during a pandemic. What were some of the things that changed about your process? You having been on sets before, realizing how you could make this film and try and keep yourself and your crew safe.
The pandemic of it all was definitely intimidating. I wanted to make sure that we were making the film as safely as possible. The last thing that I would ever want would be for someone to get sick or hurt on one of my productions. That'd be very upsetting. And I mean, also just for practical reasons, on independent films at the time, you couldn't get insurance for COVID shutdowns. So I would also be like risking my investors' money. And so I really needed to make sure that we had a lockdown set. So we had a COVID unit in Syracuse, and we tested almost every day, and we didn't have any cases, which was very lucky.
That's awesome. So did you guys kind of bubble at your hotel, I guess, and just keep
we weren't strict around bubbling, but none of the actors really knew anyone out there. And yeah, I mean,
I'm guessing the crew was masked, and so were the actors until it was time to shoot, right?
Yeah,
for the actors. Okay, that's great. And you had no cases? You got away with it, no problem?
Yeah, we got away with
that. That's fantastic.
Yeah,
that's fantastic.
Really lucky.
See, kids, masking works. And with that, we are going to get into the spoilers section, because it's impossible to keep talking about this without getting into the spoilers. If you have not yet seen I Love My Dad, press pause, go see it. You can see it in theaters, or you could find it on demand as well, and then come back and hear the rest of this. So, look, one of the things that you have that's difficult in this film that you balanced really well, which is really tough to do, is the merging of comedy and drama. And the film that easily comes to mind is Little Miss Sunshine, which starts with Steve Carell recovering from a suicide attempt. And here your character, Franklin, is finishing a meeting of other people in a suicide group. And so you're going to have that darkness in the movie. And I thought it was interesting that you never really went that far into why Franklin did it. And it leaves a question for the audience that I think it's better to leave it unanswered and to leave them guessing about, is it only his relationship with his dad? Is that it? Or are there other things? And it would seem that there's probably other things as well. And so I'm just curious about just even that setup. Were there ever iterations where you got into more about Franklin's suicide attempt?
In my experience, when you go through something traumatic or difficult, the last thing that you want to do is you're actively trying to move away from it. So I don't know, in the darkest moments of my own life, those have often been where I've laughed the hardest in one way or another, or there have been attempts to lighten the mood. And so it felt there were sections of the script where Franklin would go into talking about what happened, and I would be really unpacking the whole thing. And then it was like, no, this story is not about that, actually. And it ended up just distracting from the central core of the story. And, I mean, in order, I think, to tell a story well, you really have to focus on one thing, and then everything else is kind of just in support of that one thing. And so, yeah, it was, I wanted that to just be, he's getting out of this situation and now he's in another situation, but it is kind of looming throughout the film.
And it bubbles up, especially in the really dramatic scene in the pool outside of the apartment, like much later. And so that was another great scene that had drama, and you're really kind of going back and forth wondering when Franklin's going to crack in the movie, because that he's in such a vulnerable state. So the pool scene without a doubt worked too. Ooh, hey kids, I'm jumping in really quick to remind you that Backstory just turned 10. That's right. We've made it a decade. We're here. We've survived, and we couldn't have done it without your help. And we want to keep doing it. So your support means everything to us. And now is a perfect time to subscribe, because we just released our big summer issue. That's right. We have Emmy contenders ranging from Stranger Things, Barry, Better Call Saul, What We Do in the Shadows, Station 11, and Hacks. We also have summer movies. We have an interview with actor Glenn Powell, who plays Hangman in Top Gun Maverick. We have John Carpenter, the director of The Thing, on its 40th anniversary. Looking back, there are so many great articles to read in Backstories. Huge summer issue. There's also scripts to read. I know you'll dig it. If you've never read us before, you could, of course, test drive us by reading the free issue, which you could find at backstory.net on a desktop or laptop, or via our iPad app, Backstory. And look, after you check us out and test drive us, I hope you'll consider becoming a subscriber. And just to sweeten the deal, I want to offer you discount coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. All you got to do is enter that code at backstory.net and it'll get you access to both the iPad login and over at backstory.net on a desktop or laptop as well. Look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and iTunes and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of all these Zoom casts. That's right. You could watch us do these interviews because they were Zooms that I've put on YouTube on the Backstory Magazine YouTube page. It would really mean a lot to me to have you support my passion project. So thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. And of course, I also hope you check out today's sponsor, Screencraft, over at screencraft.org. You know, it's especially interesting how today's episode for I Love My Dad happens to be the script that won the 2020 Screencraft Comedy Screenwriting Competition. And James had a fantastic experience being able to meet with industry professionals after he won when he was really first starting to get development interest for his script. And of course, once James won, Screencraft set him up with meetings with Netflix, Joint Effort, and executives at Seth Rogen and Taika Waititi's production companies. Hundreds of Screencraft winners and finalists have gone on to be staffed and written on shows over at Netflix, Amazon, Apple TV, the CW, ABC, Paramount Plus, and they have sold scripts for films to Universal, Netflix, Lionsgate, Blumhouse, and Hulu, just to name a few. There really is something for everyone over at screencraft.org, so I hope you'll go check the site out today. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right back into our conversation with writer, director, and star James Morosini about his latest film, I Love My Dad. What were some of your left turns? What were some of the things that are definitely not a part of this movie, but you were stuck on as, oh yeah, there's definitely going to be a great scene early on in the script that you eventually cut on paper?
There were scenes that were, when I started with having Becca appear in real life, with that, I had given myself permission to be very surreal in other ways, where Chuck is going inside of Facebook and there's like Facebook land.
Okay.
And there are all these other kind of impressionistic flourishes like that throughout the film that were very surreal. And early on in pre-production, I decided that I just wanted, I wanted just one surreal thing, which is that she's appearing in reality. And I didn't want to complicate it and crowd it. I wanted there to be a really clear base reality beyond that one thing. Other than that, I mean, the first act used to be a lot longer. And my editor and we shot a lot of those scenes, but we decided to cut them because they weren't essential. And we found that it was more entertaining and impactful to jump right into the story. And that we didn't need all of this backstory necessarily.
How long was your production draft?
Probably like 106 pages.
Okay. Yeah. And so we'll talk about editing a little later. Again, there's always rewrites to be done, especially based on locations, the actors, new ideas you've had. Were there any major rewrites that you want to tell us about after you were cast and you were in your pre-production stage? There
was the occasional location adjustment that we had to make, but there weren't any, the script is so, it needs, like, we're cutting between Chuck and Franklin and Becca so much that if you change one thing, then you have to change the other thing. So it had to be pretty locked because, what Chuck is saying or typing, Becca is literally having to say and type maybe next week on the shooting schedule. So we all had to really be on the same page that, like, this is what it's going to be. It was very different than Three Something in that way.
Right. I mean, but it's good to have it locked down. So that makes sense as well. The sexting scene in particular was just quite hilarious. And you had taken a while to set it up, in which, Franklin's main complaint about his dad is that he's a liar. He's always kind of doing things the last minute. The kind of guy, almost, if people haven't seen this, I highly recommend it. The Safdie brothers, their movie, Daddy Longlegs. Have you seen it? I'm guessing.
I love that movie so much.
It's absolutely fantastic. And it's just like, it's a dad trying to do the right thing, but sometimes he gets screwed over, right? They get robbed when they have ice cream, but sometimes he just can't do it no matter what it takes. And here you set up earlier this crazy story that is so crazy it has to be real. And please correct me if it's not, because it's beautiful. It is. And that Chuck used to just have fun cheating on Yahoo Chess by using a real computer with the moves that an actual player on Yahoo Chess against him was giving him, so that he could always win as the computer. And that's kind of a setup and payoff earlier, so that later on in the movie, when things start getting really awkward and Chuck and his son end up sexting with him as Becca, he realizes that he just can't do it because it's so creepy, that he brings Rachel Drak's character, Erica, who he's dating, Patton Oswalt is dating, Chuck's dating, into the scene, and he starts sexting with her and taking her responses and giving them to Franklin as Becca. And it's complicated, but it translates so easily. And the Yahoo chess part of it is so damn funny. So A, did that happen? And B, tell us about writing that scene and then executing it, because that was a complicated scene. It must have been complicated to cut. And there was a lot going on in that scene.
So yeah, my dad definitely used to do that when he would be playing someone and then he couldn't beat them. He would get frustrated and then start doing that.
I love it.
I don't remember the moment where I realized that the sexting and that were the same, like they could be mapped onto each other in that way. But I remember being very excited about the prospect of that working. To actually execute that, I mean, even on the page, it was quite difficult because it got complicated very quickly.
You're going from scene to scene. Were you using slug lines all along, or were you just trusting the reader gets what you're doing and you're throwing in Erica in one location, and the boys in another location?
At some points in the script, I like to just talk to the reader and be candid with them. Like, yes, we're cutting between 3 different locations and 2 sexual fantasies. And like, I
so
like
you said that. You just said that as an aside.
Yeah. I'm like making those asides so that I'm not like trying to get it past them. I want to be clear. Like, yes, this is complicated.
Okay.
Stick with me. I got it clear on the page. And then, I mean, in terms of shooting it, I mean,
you didn't shoot the movie in order, did you?
No, we didn't shoot it in order. Right, I had to constantly be explaining to everyone on my crew and the actors, like, okay, like she's dropping out of frame here, so you have to drop out of frame here. Like, I storyboarded that sequence very extensively.
Okay.
So that I knew the pieces of coverage that I needed to tell the story. That was very helpful. I mean, that was really what it came down to. Once I had those storyboards and I understood how that piece of the movie was going to work, then it was pretty simple. But like screen geography, where people are in frame, I wanted to be very conscious of that throughout.
Yeah. So, and of course, like while the father-son are in their own space, when Franklin's with Becca, Erica's at a party. So there's like a whole bunch of other people around her when she's doing it. So you complicated it even further. Did you shoot the sequence in order, like over the course of days, or was it weeks apart when you were shooting Erica's stuff versus, the boys in the room?
Yeah, no, it was weeks apart.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's,
and it was
good for you, man. That's great.
Yeah. I mean, I had basically pre-edited the sequence though. So
that's the best way to do it. If you could lock it on the page and stick to it while you're shooting it, the plan works. I think is the easiest way to say it. Exactly. You're dealing with something difficult here in the movie in which your dual leads, it's really Chuck that we're seeing a lot through the eyes of because he knows everything, right? So Franklin is in the dark for most of the movie. He's hopeful that Becca's real, of course, and he has his doubts at times. But, Chuck's a good anti-hero, and your film doesn't exactly have an antagonist. So you could say that Chuck, in a sense, is also a little bit of the film's antagonist because he's let down Franklin before, which makes it a unique kind of story dynamic, which I think also leads to its success, but it's not easy to put on the page. What were some of the difficulties you had about writing an anti-hero character and not exactly having an antagonist other than, the concept that your hero is going to be caught and shamed?
I mean, in a weird way, Franklin is the antagonist to Chuck because he's cut out the main character. He's not willing to talk with the main character, and his judgment and his anger is really what Chuck and the audience essentially are up against the whole film. In that, I think there are more heady antagonists like estrangement or underlying relational complication that can be useful. I think when you're,
but they're situational. They're not, they're not always as physical. So
that's right. Or the mom, like Franklin's mom, is kind of an antagonist at certain moments where she's like trying to stop him from doing this thing. In another story, those people might be the protagonists,
right?
But here they're fighting against our main character to catch him, essentially.
That makes sense. I mean, and the tension going on until the end is absolutely insane. And I'm just curious, like, what was your dad's end game? What could you tell us about busting your dad in real life And then if you want to, and you're under no obligation to do that if it's too personal, but also especially figuring out how this movie ends, because the ending, especially knowing that it's going to be a comedy, could have gone in so many different directions. So I would actually love to hear some of the variables that you dealt with. And if you want to tell us about how you busted your dad, we're happy to hear it.
So there was an earlier version of the script where Franklin and Becca ended up kind of getting together at the end.
Really?
Where through Chuck's efforts, Franklin and Becca have this moment at the end, and it was kind of ambiguous and kind of sweet. And I really liked it for a while. And then I realized this movie actually has nothing to do with Franklin and the real Becca. The real Becca is just some random person that works at a diner. It doesn't matter it doesn't matter if they get together, because he hasn't even been talking with her this whole time. It's really like he's become closer to his dad in the process,
right?
Not romantically, but like human being to human being. They've connected in a real way. And then I was like, how can we reconcile that? It was honestly the end of the film kind of came to me in an organic way, where I was like, well, what's my experience writing this been? And what's my experience been with my actual dad? And it's that I catfished him back. No, there was this realization of like, yeah, he's not perfect and neither am I. And that's the realization I wanted Franklin to have by the end, was this kind of like realization of how hard his dad has tried with his limited tool set of being a parent. And then the idea that he would catfish him back by writing this letter kind of came out of, I don't know, in a way I felt like my writing and making this movie was in a weird way me catfishing my dad back. And so there was playing with like the meta narrative of the whole story was something that kept me very creatively excited throughout. I mean, I'm using home video footage of my actual life.
Right.
And you know, I'm playing myself, a version of myself. Like that part of it kept me, it was exciting just because it was kind of new territory.
It's interesting though, because at the end of the day, you chose the right ending, and Becca and Franklin getting together, since it really wasn't their movie, right? It's about a parent trying to be a good parent and get a second chance. Like that might, I don't think it would have worked as well. You really made a great choice, which I'm sure was not easy to walk away from, but to refocus it on the father-son relationship. And I'll ask again though, do you want to tell us how you busted your dad?
It's not as exciting.
Okay. Fair enough. Were there any other endings that you played with?
I mean, I've read every screenwriting book. I've read hundreds of screenplays. I'll sometimes find myself doing like the quote unquote correct version of something, and then find that I like am not interested and I know what's going to happen and I'm just bored. And so then I'll have to like break out of that. So there was another version that was tidier and wrapped everything up. And it was just less satisfying to me. And I wasn't, and it made me uncomfortable how cookie cutter it felt. And that I felt like I could see all of it coming. And so I threw most of that stuff out just because I think that we're numb to a lot of that stuff now.
Absolutely.
As an audience. We get it. Like we don't want to be walked through a lot of that stuff. We've seen it a billion times.
I mean, you also could have had a movie that was even cringier, and luckily you didn't. In the trailer, it gives away like a moment where it looks like they're going to kiss and Patton Oswalt's like screaming. And that was an absolutely hilarious part of the script as well. And the film, did your barometer of like, I'm going too far? Was there anything where you were worried you were going too far with the sexting stuff? Because some of the capital that you're trading here with the audience is the absolute tension of when is he going to get caught? How is he going to get caught? And just how creepy is this story? And you walked a tightrope and you walked in a straight line on it. Like you made the right choices, but I'm just curious if there was anything that was just, too crazy at one point that you had in there that you had to remove either before you shot it or in editing.
I felt like as long as Patton's character hates doing what he's doing, like he's not enjoying having to pretend kiss his son. He's not enjoying having to sext his son. Like he's feeling the way we would all feel if we were doing those things. Like he hates doing it. That keeps us on board with him and on board for the ride. So I think as long as that is the case, you can heighten it even further. I mean, you could go in any possible direction. Them sexting felt to me like probably as far as it could possibly go. And so there wasn't anything. I was definitely challenging myself to take it as far as I could.
And I'm glad you did. I mean, that ending scene was crazy, in which Chuck knows that he has to come clean finally because it's just not going to work. And Franklin is euphoric. And Chuck had no time to really reach Becca. That would have, again, been another script where he's like, I did this terrible thing as a confession to Becca. Please give my son a chance. Just be nice and you'll never see us again. Again, bad script. But you have Chuck go in the kitchen to try and diffuse things with Becca's actual real life boyfriend, who is a busboy at the restaurant, so that he could at least block him from coming in and ruining whatever moment Franklin and Becca have. But even by doing that, it might have been better for the busboy to come out and break things up earlier, because Franklin's just making an ass out of himself and doesn't realize it. It's the scene that goes as bad as it needs to. And it was good, again, that you didn't hide from that and make it cutesy, but you let both Chuck and Franklin completely and utterly, emasculate themselves and fail in that scene, which really, really works.
Yeah, I kept challenging myself as I was writing that and as we were making it, like, how much worse can it go? I mean,
right.
There was a version of the script early on where she didn't have a boyfriend. And I was like, well, what if she has a boyfriend? That makes it so much worse. And then what if Franklin tells her that he loves her? And like, how much can we add on top of it so that the stakes and the tension feel almost unbearable?
It was perfect. So editing's the last stage of storytelling. What were some of the things you learned about your film in the edit? Tell us about, the scenes that were tough to cut and some of the scenes that you did have to cut that, might end up on a Blu-ray one day or something like that.
My editor, Josh Crockett, the most important part for me about the edit was honestly my friendship with him and really having a place where I could spend hours and hours and hours talking story and exploring every nuance of the story and being comfortable in that room for 10
Were you
hours.
ever going to edit this the way you did on Threesome?
I was planning on it, actually.
Something.
I'm glad I didn't. I think it's a pretty complicated story, and I had been I was so involved in the making of it that having another perspective to help and to bring amazing ideas to the fore was very important on this process. But he has this process where he has a picture of each scene in the edit bay. So he'll have it like 6. He'll have each reel. He'll have like all of the photos from all the scenes. If that makes sense. So
even in the digital age, he's still conscious of reels. That's good. I like it.
Yeah. So we were often not looking at the Avid when we were editing. We would often just be looking at the wall and seeing the flow of the story, and mandate with each other was just no bad scenes. So anytime we felt like there was a scene that wasn't working or that just felt like it wasn't good enough, we would cut it from the movie. And then we would see, is there another way for us to accomplish what that scene was accomplishing elsewhere? And that's kind of how we went through the whole film. And in terms of scenes that were cut, there were some really there was a couple of really sweet scenes between Franklin and Becca that had some fun dramatic irony to them. Sometimes we would cut them just for pacing's sake, where we wanted to keep things really fast through a section and maybe we'd have a really slow scene. And so, we were really conscious of tempo throughout the telling of this story. And sometimes that would win over a fun, sweet scene.
Was there anything in particular you want to tell us about that you cut?
I mean, nothing.
So it was really just like more exposition of them kind of meeting each other.
Exposition.
The meet cute kind of stuff.
There were like ways that I was showing that Chuck was lonely, where he was like early on talking to a customer service rep and trying to befriend her.
Okay.
There was another scene between Chuck and Rachel Dratch where he had made a video and was like, trying to help the company, but then she calls him out on lying. It was just stuff that honestly complicated the story and made it harder for an audience to get early on what they needed to be rooting for.
Yeah.
And that was important to us. Was just, we wanted to have a really clear relationship with our audience from the jump. This is what our story is. This is what you should care about. And now this is the story. And we wanted to be clear through the whole thing.
And kudos on casting Rachel, because, that was great casting. It was inspired and she was fantastic in the movie. What was your toughest scene to direct yourself? Like specifically, not like the toughest scene to direct in the movie, but the toughest scene to direct yourself, was it the dramatic stuff, or was it something that was a complicated setup with complicated blocking that, you couldn't view the monitor because you're in it?
The diner scene at the end was quite challenging. I mean, just
sure, all those people.
Physically, it was very uncomfortable. It was in the middle of summer, so it was really hot in the diner. I was so hot and under so much stress that I was having a lot of trouble just thinking clearly.
Sure.
And I was also having to direct all these people and make sure that our background knew what to do, and having to also be, access places in myself emotionally that I didn't want to phone in. And so having to do some of that stuff over and over and over was quite challenging. And, I wouldn't recommend people try to make themselves have a nervous breakdown while trying to direct themselves. It was tough, man.
Yeah, that could be a tough one. Tell me this: what was your toughest scene as a writer and a director? Now it's just like your toughest scene to direct. But starting on the page, what was your toughest scene to write? The one that you kept coming back to over and over again, and how did you get it right?
So there are scenes in the film that have a really clear engine where you're like, okay, I get the stakes here. And I find that those scenes are really just fun to write. The scenes that are less clear in that way are often the trickier ones. Or the fight between Chuck and Franklin in the hotel room. That was a dicey one to navigate tonally. I didn't want it to feel saccharine. I didn't want it to feel on the nose. I wanted it to feel really grounded and like one of those conversations you'd have with a parent late at night where you're putting it all on the table. So nailing that, took a lot of effort. And then integrating Rachel and Lil Rel throughout the story and figuring out how those characters move through the story and connect.
Right. Lil Rel as Jimmy, who gives him the idea to do this to his son. And he gave a great performance, as well as the common voice of reason, especially when the three of them go out to drinks and karaoke one night. He worked really well as a character.
Yeah. So like figuring out how to weave them in and out, and like how to make sense of the fact that they're staying with Chuck during all of this, while also giving us kind of a mouthpiece as the audience to call Chuck out and to say what we're all hoping to say to him. And then it also gives Chuck a chance to defend himself and say like, my son almost tried to kill himself. I'm doing this to save his life. Then we're like, okay, that's hard to argue with. And then we're like more on board with him during those moments.
We are, but I mean, it's funny because again, the tightrope of comedy and drama, you realize at a certain point that to give Franklin such amounts of hope that this, perfect girl, Becca, likes him, who answers all of his questions perfectly, likes his jokes, everything else, it could have also sent him off the edge again.
Totally.
Like the film could have had a really dark ending.
Totally.
So I mean,
and it kind of does. I mean, and that's why we wanted to push it in that direction, so that we could see, oh no, the worst thing that can happen actually does happen in a way. And so that we show like, no, he doesn't have an off ramp here.
I think that's actually what holds it together, because he makes it through this newfound trauma that's so silly and absurd if you take one step back from it, that he is able to laugh at it. And it seems like a good healing process, which again reiterates your ending of having him catfish his dad to move in across the street and, to give him and his dad a little bit of a silver lining, which you also give him through the random letter that his dad sent to the game developers to see if he could come in on a test basis as a coder, because, Franklin's looking for a job. He's kind of looking for that purpose that he's a bit lost on. So that was like another nice silver lining that you did without being cutesy or lame or trite.
Thank you. Thanks, man.
So that worked as well. Well, so what's next? What are you working on next?
Yeah, I have a couple other movies that I've written that I'm really excited about. And I'm they're in different stages of being ready to make. And for me, it's, this story, I felt I was certain that I wanted to make this movie, and I put every ounce of myself into it. And so whatever I do next, I found at certain moments of my life where I've been uncertain or I was hedging, I often made no forward progress creatively. And the times in my life where I've been happiest and felt most engaged were those times where I committed with everything I have to one thing.
Yeah.
And so I'm a little bit I'm in a place right now where I feel like I'm dating a few different ideas, and I'm writing them and developing them, but I've yet to put put my foot on the gas and really commit to one to be like, this is it. This is what I'm making next. I'm writing something right now, though, that I'm very excited about.
Does it have a title?
It's called Pop. It explores fame and celebrity and fandom. And it's weirdly personal in a way too. My uncle was the actor Christopher Reeve, and it kind of explores metaphorically.
Superman, wow.
Yeah, it explores metaphorically kind of my relationship with him growing up and how I felt like his fame almost got in the way of me being able to really be his nephew. Because he was very famous. And so I would often be a fan, and it would kind of complicate things.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. Yeah. What was your biggest surprise? What was the thing that you couldn't see coming that worked out really interesting, that all the planning in the world didn't account for?
I don't know. I mean, it was tough to play a character that was so emotionally shut down and so in such a dark place, and to really try to access those parts in myself, and then to be able to quickly pivot emotionally to being like a friendly, welcoming, supportive director. And I would often find that I wasn't able to pivot as well as I would like to from the character to then the director to the character. There would often be residual in one direction or another. And so that I wasn't I've never prepared as intensely for a role as I had for Franklin, and nor had I ever prepared as intensely directorially as I had for this film. So I was those two hats, sometimes like a part of each hat would kind of stay on, and I would have to I wasn't expecting how hard that was going to be.
What was your most personal moment? The one where you've written the screenplay, you know it's based on your life, but you're on set and then suddenly it hits you in a different way than you could have anticipated.
It actually happened during the sound mix. Because up until then, I'm doing everything I can to move the ball forward and make the movie as good as it can be. And so I feel like I was very much taking action and not leaving a lot of room for my feelings throughout the process. But then at this stage of the sound mix, when it's done and you're just watching for minor thoughts and ideas, or, even in the final mix, I remember sitting in a room by myself, watching the final mix and hearing the monologue that Patton gives at the end over my home videos, that I started just sobbing, and it just hit me so hard that I just made a movie about my dad, and what that relationship really means to me, and how intense this feels to me to put into the world. That moment, I think, is it just, I couldn't contain myself, and it really affected me.
That's a cool place to do it. At least you were alone, right? So you had that going for you. You had your solace.
I actually wasn't. The sound mix was in the room, and I was having to give him notes while I was weeping hysterically, but I was embarrassed too that I was crying. And so I was having to pretend that I wasn't crying, and it was tricky.
The acting skills came in handy. Two things I noticed from your end credits: the Empire State Grant. It's always interesting to hear about funds. What was that?
I actually don't know. I have to ask our line producer, Billy Mulligan.
It was probably a tax credit thing, but also you gave a thanks to Pat Healy. I love Pat Healy.
Oh, I love Pat Healy. Yeah, I mean, Pat, I met when I was a student at USC. And he was really willing to give me advice and stuff when I was early on in my acting career. And he and I would get coffee and talk. And he's just been extremely generous to me throughout my career. And it's just a lovely dude.
Did you ever consider having him in the film at all? Was there ever a role that he could have worked for?
When we did a table read of the movie, he played Chuck, and was great in it. I just feel like Patton was more right for it.
Yeah. All hail Pat Healy. He was in the podcast for Cheap Thrills, a film that I love, and I've always dug Pat Healy. He's the best. Well, James, look, congrats on a job well done. I really dig your film, and I cannot wait to see what you do next. Thanks for coming on today.
It was really my pleasure. I'm such a fan of the podcast. I've listened to it for years, and I've learned a ton from you and from all of your guests. So it means a lot to me to be on this.
I think this makes you the 31st listener who has gone from listener to writing, directing a film, and coming on the podcast. So So you're now 31, sir.
Okay, I'll put that number somewhere. I don't know.
Put that number somewhere. But awesome, man. That's awesome to know. Thanks for listening and thanks for coming on.
It's really my pleasure, man. Thank you so much.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Thanks again to writer, director, and star James Morosini for being so generous with his time and coming down to chat about his South by Southwest award-winning film, which also happens to be the winner of the Screencraft comedy writing competition, I Love My Dad. And of course, shout out to our sponsor today of Screencraft. There really is something for everyone over at screencraft.org, so I hope you check out all they have to offer. Of course, while you're surfing around online, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine. We just turned 10, folks. We lasted a decade, and we couldn't have done it without your support. And we just published our huge summer issue. It has Emmy contenders ranging from Stranger Things, Barry, Better Call Saul, Hacks, What We Do in the Shadows, and Station 11. We have actor Glenn Powell, who plays Hangman in Top Gun Maverick, talking about what it was like to be in that incredible film and his process. And, you know, he's also a screenwriter. There's scripts to read in Backstory. There's also an interview with director John Carpenter on the 40th anniversary of The Thing. There's so many great pieces in our summer issue, and we're continuing to add to it. So it would be fantastic to have you as a subscriber. And of course, to sweeten the deal, if you want to subscribe now, you could use discount coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription to Backstory. You just enter that code into the shopping cart at backstory.net, and it will give you access to both the iPad app and the website. So look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and iTunes and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where all these Zoomcasts go. That's right. These are Zoom interviews. So you could watch us have these discussions on the Backstory Magazine YouTube page. It would really mean a lot to me to have you consider supporting my passion project. So thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2022. All rights reserved. Folks, if you want to find me on social media, you could always find me as Yo Goldsmith on Twitter or Backstory_mag on Twitter. You could also find those same accounts on Instagram. So Yo Goldsmith on Instagram or Backstory_mag on Instagram. You could check out our Facebook fan page, or you could even send us an email at backstoryletters@gmail.com. That inbox gets a little cluttered sometimes, so I apologize if I don't respond immediately, but I love hearing what folks have to say, and I promise you I will do my darndest to get to your message. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.